Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again to the airwaves of Salam Media on this rather cold Wednesday evening in Johannesburg. It's in conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi, once again on this Wednesday evening. Our listeners, our viewers on the various platforms of Salam Media, we welcome you to the show now. Obviously, this is a very, I would say, a topical issue, but also a hard issue for many of us in South Africa to digest. Because for a long time, for decades, we've actually seen South Africa carry this mantle of what we know as the Rainbow Nation. And South Africa has always been seen as a beacon of reconciliation post apartheid in South Africa, but also at the same time looking at where South Africa stands on the African continent. Now, we know South Africa has played a very active role in the African Union. Its status as a powerhouse or an economic powerhouse on the continent. And what we've seen is South Africa is seen as a natural home for Pan-Africanism. Now, this is important to understand because we've seen since the latest round of Afrophobia, you call it xenophobia, whatever you'd like to actually call it, is where does this actually leave South Africa? We've seen intimidation, we've seen vigilante-led violence across the country, and this obviously has put somewhat of a blot on South Africa. And we see this Rainbow Nation being eclipsed by a dark, inward-looking populism in the country. And the key question here, or the critical question we need to ask is this threatening to isolate South Africa from the rest of the African continent? Now, joining me this evening on the show are two very powerful guests, I would say. And I'm sure we will be unpacking a lot by taking a look at Africa at a glance, looking at the immigration unrest, and also looking at how this is going to rekindle the Pan-African debate. Is Pan-Africanism in South Africa still a relevant concept? And this is what we are asking with of my guests this evening. And we're talking with South African civic leader Mthetho Ngcukayithobi and also Nelvis Qekema, who is with us, who is the president of AZAPO. So as we await my guests on screen this evening, I must say we welcome you once again to the show, and I'm looking forward to quite a robust and a extremely engaging discussion. I see Nelvis is on already. Nelvis, assalamu alaikum, good evening to you and welcome to the show.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for having us.
Yes, Mthetho, I see, has just gone off. Perhaps he's trying to reconnect, so we'll try and get hold of him. But against the background and against the introduction that, I alluded to, Nelvis, and looking at South Africa, where we are after decades of being on the African continent, but also seen on the African continent as a powerhouse in more ways than one, as a beacon of light on the African continent. How do you see the situation as it is? Let's just greet Mthetho first, and then we'll Mthetho, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Assalamu alaikum, alhamdulillah, bye. Thank you for joining me, and good evening to your listeners.
Yes. Okay, Nelvis, let's continue. As I said, is just your thoughts on South Africa being seen a beacon in the light of we seeing how this country, or the trajectory that the country is heading for at this point in time.
I think I can start by saying that, as a matter of fact, and in the history of global politics, when it comes to the continent of Africa, South Africa is seen as one of those advanced countries economically, in terms of science, in terms of technology, R&D, and whatever you can think of. And as a result of that, South Africa tends to be highly contested by both the Eastern and then Western blocs. And for a very long time, South Africa tended to associate itself as a country, particularly if you're talking during the times of colonialism, settler colonialism. It tended to be more leaning towards the Western world. And I don't think it has lessened that contact, looking at where we are now. And because South Africa has a liberation history that tends to stand away from the Western world more towards the Eastern world, Eastern Bloc, you will then see a situation where the Western Bloc, particularly American imperialism, sought to punish South Africa, particularly because South Africa, it associated itself with the BRICS. And in the BRICS, you have Russia, you have China, and then Western imperialism was not very happy about that. And so it is that you now see Trump, have been wagging and accusing a finger against South Africa. And then you have seen the punishment that followed that, the withdrawal of aids and so all form of aid, as it were, which includes, of course, our AIDS package, which we're getting from them. And then you now see that they are also trying to cause a lot of havoc in Africa, dividing the continent further and ensuring that there will be mayhem first inside South Africa and the continent as a whole, where you now see there's a problem between South Africa and Ghana, between South Africa and Nigeria, South Africa and Mali, and so forth. This problem is not a problem that is organic inside the country. It is created outside, and then you will also see that the marauding matches and all the type of things you can talk of. If you go deeper, you'll find that they seem to be finding some funding and then some assistance, some support, technical, financial, and otherwise from dubious forces.
Well, certainly Nelvis, but also Mthetho, I think just following up from what Nelvis is saying, and one cannot deny the fact, one cannot shy away, or one cannot hide from the fact that there are external forces at play in terms of destabilizing South Africa, and because of the reasons that Nelvis spoke about as well in terms of South Africa and our position. And we know a lot of it had actually gained momentum after South Africa took the case to the ICJ and the case for genocide. But coming back to South Africa, and we are caught obviously between a rock and a hard place, where on the one hand, we have got a relationship with the Western world, with the likes of the United States of America. Nelvis spoke about economic, and on the other side, you've got BRICS, you've got the global south as well. But just looking at Africa in itself, because we know historically, South African freedom was not won in a vacuum. We had obviously forged relationships with many countries in Africa, whether we're talking about Dar es Salaam, we're talking about Lusaka, we're talking about the financial and other sacrifices that other countries have made for us to attain our democracy. And it came as a huge cost because the apartheid regime actually, they bore the brunt of military aggression even from our very own apartheid regime.
Once again, good evening to your listeners. Good evening to your viewers. We are in a country whereby we are held hostage through history, and some of the history itself, it's not really accurate, and we are talking of history that is very much misleading. We will make examples of countries like Nigeria, when they will talk about these billions that they've given to aid in South Africa. But if you look at the time that they were apparently giving out these billions, they were themselves in tribal wars at that time. So where do you get funding at that time to give to a country while your own country at that time it's having tribal wars within itself. Moving right along, we as South Africa have been given a failed project called Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism has failed throughout the whole of Africa. It's only enforced in South Africa. Why is it forced in South Africa? South Africa accommodates all rights and citizens in its own nations. If you look at the direction in Africa, who was the first champion in gay rights? It was South Africa itself. So that on its own, it says a lot. We are talking about countries that have got independence prior 50, 60 years ago. Those are countries that we should be looking at as big brothers in the South African continent. Like an example also of our neighbor, our next door neighbor, Zimbabwe. It's almost now 46 to 47 years in its independence. It's very misleading once again, to make as if like South Africa never played a role also into financially assisting these countries. There were bailouts that were given to President Mugabe while he was still alive. You know, you would look at situations in Zambia itself where the head office of the ANC was based there. There was a repatriation of our South Africans that were brought back into South Africa to be laid into rest. So we are busy being fed a project that is not meaningful to South Africans as a whole. Look, our democracy is very young, and when it's very young, we are talking about 33 years in its existence. We are still fighting for the littlest crumbs ever. You are talking maybe education, healthcare, you name it, etc. So we are at the point in South Africa as South Africans to say that we have not fully enjoyed the rights of being South Africans. Look at the situations of, once again, of the employment rate. The youth itself, it's at 60%, right? And that 60%, you look at the numbers that quarterly just ate in the quarter numbers, 345,000 were let to leave their employment because it's not conducive anymore. Now, yes, in instance, you may talk about the ICJ courts in the regarding of affiliations, but we need to look at yet again the Western world also is
Yes, Nelvis, I think we actually have lost Mthetho. Let's hope he will come through. But I think let's just follow up from what he says. And I think he makes a very interesting point in terms of Pan-Africanism being a failed project. Now, it all depends how one will measure success or failure. Uh, and I think this is important because on the one hand, when we talk about success, we know Pan Africanism has succeeded historically in terms of the anti-colonial mission, and got rid of colonialism. But on the other hand, when one looks at economic independence, we don't have that. We don't have economic independence because we still rely, we are heavily dependent, despite our natural, our vast resources on this continent, we still rely on the rest of the world to dictate things like global trade and all of that. And that obviously, at the end of the day, is, tells us a story that Pan-Africanism, from an economic perspective, has not succeeded.
No, in fact, it cannot be said with a straight face that Pan-Africanism has failed. In fact, Pan-Africanism has succeeded, and succeeded tremendously, materially and otherwise. And that is not to say that Pan-Africanism has not met challenges and that it does not continue to meet challenges. Indeed, it does continue to meet challenges. In fact, it should, because Pan-Africanism is waging a struggle for the self-determination of Africa it is waging a struggle against imperialism to ensure that the continent is able to husband its resources, beneficiate its resources for itself first before it goes to the outside world. And that has not been happening in the manner that we wanted it to do, because the imperialist world, and I'm talking about, your America, your France, your Britain, your Germany, you name all those countries that shared the continent and its resources amongst themselves. And in fact, we are where we are today because those countries that I'm talking about way back in 1848, they made it a point that the continent was divided amongst themselves and its resources, and they then started to zone the country in a very arbitrary way, which did not take care the peoples of the continent, which is why you find that there are Botswana in South Africa and Botswana in Botswana, because they just cut without caring, and they were just caring about their resources, which are sharing among themselves. That's why you have Basotho in South Africa and Basotho in Lesotho. You also have people in South Africa being thrown all over the shore. And then we have our relatives here and others across the borders, with the borders were arbitrary. And this was happening because they wanted to make sure that economically we never got to be independent. The strife that you are talking about, people crossing from Zimbabwe, coming over here, from Rwanda, from Uganda, the wars you find in the DRC are created by the outside world more than they are created by us in the continent. So what I'm saying in short is that no, Pan-Africanism has succeeded because we are now having 54 independent states because of Pan-Africanism. And we are now having a continental governance, which we did not have before because of this Pan-Africanism. And then we are coming together as the countries of the continent of Africa and the diaspora because of Pan-Africanism. Even ideologically, we're becoming clearer and clearer because of this Pan-Africanism. Even psychologically, economically, we are clear where we stand. And because of this Pan-Africanism, it is the reason why Muammar Gaddafi, the leader or the former leader of Libya, was killed because he was coming about with one African currency, and that was going to undermine, as to the belief of America, the dollar. That was for them another project to inject de-dollarization in the economics of the continent. And as a result of that, he was killed. So all I'm saying is that we are where we are right now. Even the strife you're getting in the continent, the strife you're getting in South Africa, it's not organic to the people of South Africa and the continent. It is something that is coming from externally. It is the forces that do not want us united. It's the forces that want to have us in poverty forever and forever. It is the forces that want to subject us to their domination, the world domination, imperialist domination. So I am saying it is those forces that want us to fight together and amongst ourselves as Africans. That's what you're finding right now. And then if you look across, white people, Europeans, no problem. Is there anybody worrying about undocumented or documented white South African Europeans? Nobody cares about that. We're fighting amongst ourselves because we are still suffering under the rough arm of racism and self-hatred. That is why you find it very easy to kill one another, ban one another, ensure that no African will be getting healthcare in our country, no Africans will be sending their children in our schools. Yes, of course, if you're worried about undocumentation, that can be addressed through the rule of law. And otherwise, you cannot be marauding and going around and beating up people and then killing people. No, never, 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 never.
Thank you for that, Nelvis. And I think, Mthetho, I think Nelvis raises some very, very critical points. When we talk about nationalism or sacrificing our unity over nationalism, and once again, when one looks at this, is not only a problem that is unique to Africa, this is a problem that is right across the entire world. When we talk about 54 nation states on the African continent, we've seen it in the past. We've seen the breakup of the Middle East and the Persian Gulf region, where they became nation states. We've seen that breakup in the Asian subcontinent, with the partition of India, Pakistan, and leaving Kashmir to fight over. So perpetually, you are in a state of conflict. You are in a state of war. Now, looking at South Africa and looking at the African continent again, we've moved away from colonial resistance to national independence. But again, looking at the independent nation states, should they be prioritizing their own sovereignty over a united African continent?
Host, once again, thank you very much. My colleague in studio, at some point we need to be factual and we need to be honest of what is really transpiring on the ground. I per se, I am mostly on the ground when we are talking about beating people, etc. It comes back to resources. You would find countries like your Zimbabwe, all in the African states, people who have land, and you would come in Africans who tell you that our land is still in the hands of Europeans, of which we believe, yes, it's still in the hands of Europeans because we are still in a journey of fighting back the system of apartheid, obviously colonizations, etc. But we need not to mislead people. We are talking about people who are already established. Take, for instance, right now, Zimbabwe has just given out land back to white people with compensation. That on its own, it says a lot. South Africa, at this current juncture, we are still at resources. It may be healthcare sector, it may be also the educational sector. Now, when I'm saying let us not be misleading people, we are saying that African people need to come into the country in the form of the correct documentation. When we are putting them into schools, we don't want them into our government schools. They need to go to private schools. That's where they belong. When you're taking them to hospitals or clinics, not in our government clinics, they need to go back to the private. We have a situation right now of a 1.1 billion owed by Africa from tuberculosis treatment to cancer treatment. Nobody's paying that bill as South Africans. And bear in mind that we need to understand that this is money from the taxpayers' money. The little South Africans that are employed are the ones that are feeding the bill. We are not a country that would house the whole of the 54 states that are in Africa. We don't have that capacity, as they have also their own resources, as their own their brothers, their elder brothers, into the liberations of their own countries. What we are looking for as South African is trade. When we are talking about trade, we are not talking about cheap labor. We don't want slave trade, because most of the time now you would find what you're bringing here into South Africa in these economic migrants that we are finding in this country. It's people that are going to be cheap labor. They are going to be flaunting our laws into our labor sector. We've got labor laws that says that, especially in the low level area, you cannot hire an illegal immigrant, a foreigner, in a non-rest scale. That is Employment Act 1904. and it constitutes when you move into that sector of Immigrations Act 13 of 2002. So we need to understand of where we are in South Africa. The born of democracy, it's still 33 years. We still need to establish a South Africa for South Africans first, for us in order to say, yes, we can try and assist whomever that is looking for assistance. He's naming countries like your DRC. We are talking about tribal wars again. Because if you look at the Rwandans, that were fighting also in DRC, it's tribal wars. Now, you would come back to the very same borders that you would talk about. Borders were there, like it or not. They were there before even the imperialists came with them. It's just that they were not visible at per se. I'll make a typical example. Borders were divided by rivers. A certain family, in order for it to go and take its livestock to graze, you would not pass up until you would ask for permission into that, and you would look at certain elements of people, especially like your Amamfengus in the Xhosas, you look at Amabhaca and etc. There were borders in those in those areas. It's not something new. Let us not mislead people that to say that there were no borders. There were not borders per se to say I am dividing a line. There were borders you would find it's a mountain, you would find it's a river. That's where we are. So as South Africa, we are still new in this democracy. We are not ready to help Africa. We still need to find ourselves as South Africans. Now, we will just hit back again to the formation of this slave trade. You'd find the rest of Africa in our kitchens. If not in kitchens, you would find them in traffic lights begging in our traffic stop signs with kids. When you ask questions again, are we also participating in alleged human trafficking in this sector? Because when these people, at some point, you would find it's Easter, they can easily go back home. When it's December, they can easily go back home. We don't have trade people. We have people who are going to push an element of slave trade, and of which that is where we are to say the buck stop there. We cannot participate in that manner. Thank you.
Yes, Mthetho, we're going to go for a break, gentlemen. I'm going to put both of you on hold. We'll be back in a minute.
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media. Humanity sets the agenda.
Kids these days are smart, and when you're competing for their attention against their smartphones, you need to make smart choices, like using Sunfoil triple refined pure sunflower oil in every meal you make. It's naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether you're cooking, frying, or baking, you get the great tasting results that'll get their attention faster than the latest app. And if that doesn't work, change the Wi-Fi password. Sunfoil. Now we're cooking.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Al Bayt Lodge, your true home away from home. Al Bayt is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities, conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities. Your stay will be truly unforgettable, as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415 or visit www.albaytlodge.co.za.
Yasin Badat Financial Advisory. Are your financial goals feeling out of reach? Yasin Badat Financial Advisory is here to turn your aspirations into achievements. Our dedicated team, armed with a history of success, is ready to guide you through the complex nature of financial and investment planning. Whether you're a seasoned investor or new to the game, our personalized solutions cater to your unique goals and risk appetite. Trust in our commitment to transparency, integrity, and excellence. Ready to unlock a world of financial freedom? Partner with us today. Call Yasin Badat Financial Advisory at +27 33 346 2071 or visit www.yasinbadat.com. Yasin Badat Financial Advisory, guiding you to financial success.
Give the gift of clean water with Africa Muslims Agency. With every water well or borehole you donate, your drop becomes a river, reconnecting communities to nourishment, education, dignity and empowerment. Sponsor a water well for 17,000 Rand in Africa or a borehole for 65,000 Rand in Afghanistan or Africa. Quench the thirst. Reconnect the soul with Africa Muslims Agency.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
Well, the time is just on 7:31 p.m. as we continue our broadcast this evening, taking a look at the Pan-African debate in the context of the surge of protests. And we know, looking ahead at June the 30th, we don't know at this point in time as to what is going to take place. But clearly there are xenophobic, there are Afrophobic protests that is taking place. And the sentiment is very, very strong at this point in time. But some of the key issues here, and Nelvis, I see Mthetho is not back with us, but just to understand some of the issues that he raised in terms of a disconnect with the citizens of this country, particularly when we're looking at South Africa, our daily realities that we are faced with. Many, many millions are actually grappling with severe socio-economic hardships, and one cannot hide away from the fact. And again, looking at Africans, who are now being labeled as foreigners on their own continent, but also blaming the current tensions on borders and those that come across from North and many other countries from on the African continent.
No, thank you. Excuse me very much. And I think I need to clarify the point that at the level of history, or the stage of history where we are now, nobody would want to deny the fact that we now, the imperialist or colonialist borders are now a reality that we must contend with. We cannot wish them away or deny them, which is why, as AZAPO is saying, that indeed, and any person who goes to any other country, that person would have to get into that country, and that person has to be documented for many reasons. In terms of planning for that particular country, you need to know in this area who is here, and then is this clinic enough for those people, the medicine enough for those people, the schools enough for those people, including, of course, the police stations and the vans. Are they enough for those people? Now, you cannot know that if people are not documented. So nobody is saying no, nobody must be documented. Indeed, people must be documented. But the way you go about doing it, it must be humane. It must recognize the dignity and integrity of fellow human beings. Now, I would have asked my comrade Mthetho that does he know that even the statistics is unable to tell us how many undocumented Europeans are in this country, South Africa. They don't know, and they admit that they don't know, but they do admit that there are undocumented Europeans in this country. In fact, Comrade Chris Hani was killed by a Polish undocumented immigrant, and up until that time, nobody cared about it. We thought there could never be undocumented white people, because for some people who suffered self-hatred, they think that everything that is white is sacred and it goes, and it is heavenly as they go. And that is a mistake, and that is a problem of having internalized racism, and then which causes self-hatred amongst the people. So if I were to ask Comrade Mthetho how many undocumented white people, he would not know. And that also because he doesn't care. Because for him, and I'm saying this with respect, because for him, if you are white, then you must be documented, you must be legal, like, you can't go wrong. But if you are black and African, there must be something wrong with you. We must find fault with you, because racism has taught us self-hatred. So that's where we start. And then again, listen to the thinking by my comrade Mthetho, who then says they were never, there were always boundaries in this country. By so suggesting and so saying, and without him realizing, he is absolving colonialism, absolving imperialism, absolving slavery caused upon us or visited upon us by the Europeans. Now, because if he says so, and they're suggesting that there have always been boundaries in this country and in the continent, he is suggesting, and wrongly so, that we always lived in nation states, yet nation states came about in the continent only in the 19th century, mid-19th century, during the scrambling for Africa. So there were never nation states in the continent before that. We did not even have city-states for that matter, because imperialism and colonialism, out of its greed, they then frog-marched us to jump all the other stages into the nation states. So therefore, Comrade Mthetho is not correct. And then in fact, he's now treading on thin as very, very, very dangerous ground to say there were never boundaries, because it's suggesting we never had colonialism, we never had imperialism, we never had our land stolen from us, we never had our great-great-parents and our parents raped by colonialism and imperialism. So that is dangerous. He should never pursue that argument. And listen again. When Comrade Mthetho boasts that it is only cheap migrants that come to South Africa from Zimbabwe, again, he is degrading our people. He is degrading fellow Africans. And that they come here, they are cheap, and then I'm sure white people who come here, they're educated, they're rich, and this and this and that, and our people, they are scraps and chips and whatever coming. No, we cannot have that self-hatred kind of argument against ourselves. Remember again, the people from all parts of Africa who come here, they come here not exclusively and solely because those countries are failing, but they are coming here because imperialism has a stranglehold on the economies of those countries. And again, if you are talking about boasting that when fellow Zimbabweans come here, it is our taxpayers who paying this, paying for that, what Comrade Mthetho does not realize is that the tax paying that you are talking about, it is in fact the majority of it done by white people, because they control over 98% of the economy. We've got nothing to talk about paying any tax about. The factories, 74% of the land is in white people's hands. The economy, about 98% of it is in white controlled by less than 10% of the economy. So what is this that Mthetho is worried about, that we're paying this, we're paying that? In fact, when he says South Africa, so for South African first, what he forgets is that even now in South Africa is not for South Africans, but it is for settlers and white people, Europeans, some of whom control the land of this country from abroad. So what is he talking about? In fact, we need to talk about Africans, talk about black people being the controllers of this land, because it belongs to them. The economy, the wealth belongs to us. We are the indigenous people of this land. Oh, come on, please.
Yes, but also, Nelvis, I think, what is important to understand is, instead of challenging those who benefit from the inequality, and you speak about land and, in whose hands lies the economy at this point in time, it appears as if attention is being diverted towards migrants, to refugees, to people who we can term as marginalized communities. But it's also a pattern that is not unique to South Africa. We've seen this across Europe. We've seen this in the United States of America. Far-right political movements gaining support, blaming migrants for economic insecurity. So we see a pattern that is starting to emerge as well. And once again, is this not strategically a strategy of distraction? Because ordinary people on the ground are encouraged to direct their anger towards other poor working class people, rather than holding those who hold economic power, political power, holding them accountable.
Oh, you hit the nail on the head. All what is happening now is first dissipating and misdirecting the energy of the people, because black people, Africans, must be made not to care about the real issues. They must worry about symptomatic issues that are not the thing and the real problem. And they must also be made to direct the anger not just against fellow Africans who are said to be immigrants. Remember, those fellow Africans are in fact us. So we are then made to direct our anger against ourselves, so that we are never able to fight or direct the struggle against capitalism. We must forget about capitalism. We must forget about our wealth. We must forget about our resources, forget about the land, and then worry about another fellow African who's coming here because he's struggling like me, like you. And then by so doing, capitalism, imperialism, colonialism is enjoying an eternal lease of life. And also by so doing, by the same token, poverty, landlessness, and slavery will forever be enjoying an eternal lease of life, because we'll never be made to fight against these serious and real problems. Now look at again. And then somebody is complaining now that no, the fellow Africans who are said to be immigrants are taking our jobs. Now, that is again shifting the blame, shifting the problem, because here, why is it that African people are only seen for or as job seekers, but never as job creators and people who are owning property? And then again, we forget that even the jobs that we are talking about, it is imperialism that is benefiting from exploiting fellow Africans that are undocumented and underpaying them, and then giving them a slave stipend, not even a wage, a slave stipend. And then what are we doing? We're now trying to go and fight over our people that are taking our jobs. Look and go there. What types of jobs are those? Are jobs of slavery and slaving jobs. Those are not the jobs and real jobs that we should be worrying about. And as a people, so indeed I agree, And all that is happening in our country right now, we are made to be slaves forever and fight amongst ourselves and kill ourselves and displace ourselves. And that's all that is happening. And we forget about fighting capitalism, landlessness, and slavery.
Yes, but Nelvis, isn't this an African problem? Because we're talking about Pan-Africanism as well, where when one looks at it from an institutional perspective, where formerly we had the Organization of African Unity, which then transitioned into the African Union to promote continental solidarity, and we haven't seen that happen.
So true, so true. And I can trace that problem from different ends. I will start first in the country. How statism, or those who are in power, in other words, the managerial class, the comrade bourgeoisie, or the native bourgeoisie, those who are in governance on behalf of imperialism and colonialism, what they are doing against the people is a situation where you see that, for instance, in South Africa, they don't care about looking after the borders. They don't care about implementing the Immigration Act of 2002 in a humane manner. They just don't care. They allow those things to happen, and then when the problems do happen like they're happening now, and they fold arms as if they don't know who created the problem, because the problem is not even created by fellow poor people like themselves in South Africa, but it is created by the government, and the number two is created by the dubious funders who want to fund the black on black violence or African on African violence. But now go to the continent, you will see that in the continent, we are still divided as Africa that belongs to Spain, Africa that belongs to France, Africa that belongs to Britain, Africa that belongs to Germany. And so it is that you find in the same continent, there are people in Africa who can't speak an indigenous language. They've been so colonized, brutally colonized, to an extent that they now speak European languages. They speak Francais or French. They can't speak their own language. They speak Spanish, Portuguese. They can't speak their own languages. And then you know that if you destroy a language of a people, you destroy the culture of that people, because language, as experts say, is a carrier of culture. So this, and then you now find the League of Nations, which also did not do as much as is needed to do. You have now the OAU, which does not even care when South Africa is under siege, when DRC is under siege. America has to come from America and pretend to be solving the DRC problem, when in fact they want to steal the resources of that country, as now is the case. So indeed, the problem is at an upper echelons level. The powers that be in the continent, the powers that be in South Africa. And this is a problem. That's why we as ordinary people, the peoples of Africa, peoples in South Africa, instead of worrying about we are a nation, we are this and that, because we are a continental people. Remember, some Comrade Mthetho here has talked about there have been boundaries all the time. He forgets that in fact there were no boundaries, because we're always a pastoral people and a nomadic people. Even where we were settled, we did that for cultural settlement and then for our livestock and other things. So indeed, I agree with you. It's a problem that needs to be fought from below, because the above has sold us in the country and in the continent.
No, but when we're talking about solving the problem, and the question would be, what do we do, considering that we are in a very, very serious and a precarious situation right now? And the one big concern for a number of years has been, is South Africa ripe for a revolution? because we've seen how the political landscape has changed. I mean, the ruling ANC government has been losing power consistently, or losing support consistently over a period of time, election after election, up to a stage where we're now in a government of national unity. And clearly, this signals that, you know what, the entire political landscape could look very, very different, you know, and especially against the background of the problems that we find ourselves in. And if we are in this revolutionary mode, it's not going to make life any easier.
I'm glad you could ask that question, the Leninist question, what is to be done? In my view, AZAPO's view, of course, is that in the continent, we must be very careful not to be preoccupied with a narrow nationalism, which is so fake as to make us to believe that we're different from fellow Africans and we're better than fellow Africans and we're richer and then we have everything, we're okay as South African over fellow Africans. That type of exceptionalism that we must condemn and disabuse ourselves of as South Africans. We are just Africans like all the other Africans. The boundaries that we have in this continent, they are now here. Like I said, we can't wish them away, but they are here for only the expediency of governing and governance. That's all that they help us in doing. Just like in South Africa, you may have the country South Africa, but for governing purposes, you will still have to rationalize in terms of, legislative boundaries, economic boundaries, just to help you to be able to govern the country. But that does not mean KZN is different from Eastern Cape, Mpumalanga, Limpopo, or that the Western Cape is another country which is better because it is led by the white supremacist DA. That should never be. So in other words, now we need to go the grassroots level, which goes beyond our national boundaries, and then we pledge and forge solidarities with other poor peoples in the continent, with other working class or working classes in the continent. And we do so with other landless people, peasants in the continent beyond the narrow imperialist or colonialist created boundaries. But we forge alliances as a people, and that is able to be running on the basis of the platform or the Pan-Africanist platform, which is saying to us as a people, we are a continent, and you are a continental people, who are one and the same people, flesh of the same flesh, bone of the same bone, blood of the same blood. So therefore, we should never allow ourselves to be divided by the native bourgeoisie of our countries in Africa. That should never happen. We must come together as a people, forge alliances, and then fight imperialism, fight colonialism, and fight even the stranglehold by our own native bourgeoisie, which are controlled by imperialism. And
now, but just finally, and we've got about 3 or 4 minutes to go. We know the prophets of doom are predicting that this is the end of South Africa. In your mind, is there hope?
No, not at all. Remember that the development in itself is uneven. So as you come to understand issues and see the light reality by necessity in your own circumstances, And that light hasn't come to me. And then, which is why in South Africa, you see people who see it and people who don't see it, in different knowledge time zones in the same country, South Africa, and in the continent as a whole. So, therefore, we should never tire, because we are not in a post-ideological society. This is an ideological society, which is why imperialism and then the Western culture is dominant when you look at what is happening, and which is why when you see some Africans in the very same South Africa, they see themselves much closer to the French, to the Americans, to the British than they are to their fellow Africans. And then we are again not a post truth society. So therefore, we need to keep on preaching. We must never tire to educate all the time. Keep on educating and educating. But again, we must also organize, because what is failing us as a people is that we don't have institutions. We are not organized. If we dared to be organized, I can assure you there are a lot of things through our sheer strength coming together, we can defeat without any force of arms, just our coming together as a people that believe the indomitability of the spirit, that determination that we say will carry on. Victory is certain.
Well, Nelvis, thank you very much for that, and also for your time. It's a pity, Mthetho, obviously, we lost him. Apparently, I've seen a message that he was on his way home to try, and he would try and join us again. But unfortunately, this hasn't happened. We also tried to get out of Aisha Keji to join us on the show, but she had a bit of a slight accident. Apparently, she had a fall, and she couldn't join us. But Nelvis, you carried the ship. You steered the ship, almost solo throughout the entire program. So we thank you for that and for your time. All the best to you, sir.
Thank you very much for this enlightening station of yours. Thank you. Keep going.
Thank you. All the best to you. Nelvis Qekema joining us, and it's a pity Mthetho Ngcukayithobi. You couldn't join us. Sorry, I battled to say that surname, but we will definitely get it right. But again, I think this is quite an interesting angle to actually look at what is taking place in South Africa from an African perspective, and where does this actually leave the African continent. Yes, we know that many countries on the African continent have already expressed their concerns, particularly those with their citizens who are in South Africa. They have raised this issue with the South African government. We've seen quite a few noises being made by many of these African countries, and rightly so. These are their citizens. But again, there is a bigger picture. There is a lot that has obviously contributed in the build-up to what we are seeing happening right now. And we know at this point in time, all eyes are going to be on June the 30th, which is what we are going to be taking a look at immediately after this, taking a look ahead in terms of readiness, in terms of preparedness. And we will be talking with the security cluster when we come back after this.